Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today for this workshop on using Tropy to organize your research photos. My name is Gwendolyn Reese, and I am the Associate University Librarian and Director of Research, Teaching, and Learning at American University Library. So today we're going to be covering a tool, Tropy, and about how to use it for organizing your research images. So for those of us who take a lot of research photographs, one of the things that I'm sure we're aware of is that it can be very difficult to keep track of what you took and where you took it. And so it can be very useful to have a tool that allows you to organize your research images by topic and make them searchable. It's also really important, but can be very difficult to keep all of the corresponding information for the photographs together with the actual image. So for example, I take a lot of research photographs at archaeological sites. And if you were to go look at my iPhone, the way in which they are displayed as just all of these images that after a little bit of time just look like an awful lot of pictures of rocks can be very difficult to keep track of what it was I was taking, why I was taking it, what the meaning of it is. So this is a tool that can help us organize these kinds of situations. In addition to that, if you are the kind of researcher who takes a lot of pictures of images from archives, for example, or photographs of museum collections, often there are circumstances in which you will have to keep track of rights information should you want to use it in your own publication. And that includes reuse in not just scholarly publications, but in online exhibits. So it is, again, kind of challenging sometimes to keep track of all these things. And what we're going to talk about is having a tool that will bring them together in a very useful way. So this particular workshop is part of a series that we're offering through American University Library on various online exhibition platforms. And the online exhibition platforms that we offer through American University Library and American University generally are WordPress, which is at AU, called EdSpace at AU, and is run through the Center for Research, Teaching, and Learning. ArcGIS Story Maps and Omeka S, both of which are offered through the library. And then Tropy, which is what we're covering today, is not actually an online exhibition platform. It is a free tool that helps you organize your images, and therefore is useful to scholars who may never create an online exhibition, but simply have a lot of research images that they need to keep track of. But one of the most important steps in creating an online exhibition is to make judicious selections about the graphical components and the pictures that you will be using. And so therefore it can be quite helpful if you have a lot of them to have all of your pictures arranged. So Tropy is a support software for online exhibition creation. So what is Tropy? Tropy is a free software brought to us from the Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and New Media at George Mason University. And these are the same people that also created and make available Zotero. And if you are familiar with Zotero, then the interface of Tropy will look very similar. So anyone can download Tropy at the main site, which is https://tropy.org. So what is it, and why should we use it? Well, first of all, it organizes your research images. What it basically does is keep your images linked with appropriate metadata. And this makes it easier to find your images based on topic And it also keeps all of the information that you would need in order to do those permissions requests should you want to publish the image in one place, because there's a very handy rights field that we will go into in more depth later. Another thing that Tropy can do, which is wonderful, is that you can combine images into a single document. So if you are doing archival research, for example, and you are taking pictures of a 30-page document in an archive, you can link all those together and put them into a single file that keeps them all together, as opposed to having 30 different photographs that look like they're not related. Another thing that you can do is you can create lists, which are quite helpful when you are when you are working on organizing your work. You can annotate the images, and you can export into JSON LD and directly into Omeka S. So Omeka S, as I said, is a online exhibition platform, and it's actually, again, provided and created by the Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and New Media. And then JSON LD is a protocol that you can use to export metadata, and then you can import that into any of the other online exhibition platforms. So often the pictures that you take at museums and archives are under someone else's copyright. And one of the pieces of advice that I give to scholars is to always check and record the rights information while you are there, while you are in the process of taking the picture. Because sometimes the original owner or a donor maintains the copyright of the specific item. So for example, in our archives, we have items that the owner or the original creator maintain the copyright, and you would need to ask them for permission in order to reuse the photograph that you took in your publication or in your exhibit. And this kind of thing can be very difficult to reconstruct after the fact. So while you are taking the images, it is best to ask if you are there, and you need to ask the archivist or the curator, because often just writing the name of the institution is insufficient if there is an individual that still has the copyright. So in Tropy, there is a rights field, and a pro tip would be to include a URL to any relevant policies in that rights field so that you can find them later. My advice is to be as fulsome as possible in your description about the rights situation. Now, of course, you can always cite any of the materials, but if you want to duplicate a photograph in a collection, you may well need to seek permission. It's also, by the way, useful to note when you don't have to do that. So to install Tropy, you go to the Tropy URL, tropy.org, and then from there you choose your operating system. And Tropy works with Windows, Mac, or Linux. Once you have downloaded the software, you will need to create a new project. A project is the major organizing principle in Tropy, and items live in a single project. So you want to be thinking carefully about how you frame your project. So maybe it is for a particular study that you're doing. Maybe it makes more sense to put everything under the umbrella as a project of an entire research agenda. It may make more sense by a subtopic. So for example, for the purposes of this presentation, I have created a project that I am calling the Eleusinian Mysteries, which are the ancient mystery religion of Demeter and Persephone in Eleusis, Eleusis, Greece. Realistically, that is not how I do it on my own Tropy, because I have thousands upon thousands of archaeological photographs from ancient Greece. And while at this moment I am working on a project on the Eleusinian mysteries, I am also working on a project on ancient Hellenic oracle sites. And at some point in the hopefully not too distant future, I will probably be doing some work on cave temples. Now, the pictures that I have include cave temples that are important in the Eleusinian mysteries and cave temples that are important in a number of the oracle sites, and then other cave temples that are not related to oracles or to the Eleusinian mysteries. So I want to be able to look across my entire collection of archaeological photographs from Hellenic and Hellenistic sites. So for that makes more sense. But for the purposes of showing you something that's not an overwhelming number of entries, I have created a little subsite just for this presentation. At the same time, though, I have other research agendas that are not related to ancient Greece at all, and so those would be under a different project. So you just want to think through carefully when you're putting together your projects. The way in which then you set this up is that you go to File, New, Project. And as you can see, I have created a project called the Eleusinian Mysteries. And you want to give your project something that is a name that you will understand what it is later. Once you have done this, then you go to File, Import Photos, and you begin dropping your photos into Tropy. Next is the application of metadata. And I want to talk for a moment about the metadata schemes that Tropy utilizes. And this is where the real power of this tool lies. I'm going to spend most of my time talking about Dublin Core. I think for most things that is the most useful. There is also a Tropy generic metadata scheme, which is a lightweight. It's a very lightweight, easy metadata scheme. It's not as rich as Dublin Core. And then there is Tropy correspondence. And the time that I would recommend using Tropy correspondence over Dublin Core is for letters. If you are doing archival research on letters, I would recommend using that. But the most important thing is to be descriptive and consistent in your terminology. So here you can see the metadata schemes. You can choose between Tropy generic, Dublin Core, and Tropy correspondence. I have created a handout that is metadata for lay people, and I'm going to link it in the comments field, but also it is in the subjectguides.library.american.edu/exhibit. You'll see a link to that document through there. So if you're primarily doing archival research, you may want to use Tropy Basic. It's easy. If you don't need a lot of detailed information, that is the easiest to use. For letters, I definitely would recommend Tropy correspondence. And the reason why is that it's like Tropy Basic, but it includes a field for recipient so that you can search on who is receiving the letters as well as who is writing the letters. And that's so important in that type of archival research that if that's what you're doing, I would use Tropy correspondence. Now, Dublin Core is a metadata standard for describing digital resources, and it has 15 elements that allow for interoperability of metadata standards, which is important for things like linked data and semantic web implementations. So just as a note, when we're going through this, if you are entering more than one entry or term in a field, you can separate them with a semicolon. So for example, the Eleusinian Mysteries is the ancient mystery religion of Demeter and Persephone. If I wanted to make Demeter searchable and I also wanted to make Persephone searchable, I enter in the words separated by a semicolon. Also, HTML is not case sensitive, but if you're going to export for whatever reason into XML, it is. XML is case sensitive. So it is preferable to use the cases appropriate to any controlled vocabulary. Now we're going to go through a brief tour of the Dublin core elements, and these are all in that handout. First is the title, and if there are multiple versions of the title, you can just use it separated by a semicolon. The creator, this can be an individual, an organization, a service. It's whoever is most responsible for the creation of the item that you are taking a picture of. The date is the date and time of the image creation. Type, the nature or genre of the resource. And the best practice is to include at least one of the Dublin core types. And in the handout or here on the screen, I have given you links to where you can find the Dublin core type vocabularies and also the Getty art and architecture vocabularies. The Getty has some amazingly powerful controlled vocabularies for various kinds of images, and I use them a lot. Now, the source is a reference to the resource from which the present image is derived. And this includes information that would get you back to the original. So for example, if there is a classification system that was used, then utilize it. So if you have a scanned image that is from a particular book that is cataloged by the Library of Congress, then you can include the Library of Congress call number, and that way you can get back to that specific book. If you are using an archive, then you want to be sure to include the name of the archive, the collection, the box, and the folder. All of the information that is going to get you back to that original. This is where you put it. For the identifier, if there's a URL, a DOI, or a finding aid, you put the link to any of those into this field. And then, as I had mentioned earlier, the rights field. In this field, you want to record any information you have about who holds the rights should you want to use it in a later work. And this would include intellectual property rights, copyright holder, contact information if you have it, and all other property rights situation. So if you have a photograph from a museum or an archive, when you are taking that photograph, find out about those rights and document them, as well as including a URL to any policies, as I had said before. Put the contact information you will need and any local information about requesting reuse. This is the kind of thing that is just a nightmare to reconstruct later and is so easy to organize in the moment. So do yourself a favor and try to gather all that at the time you're taking the pictures. The subject field. So these are the keywords or the phrases that describe the resource. And the best practice is to use a controlled vocabulary, an existing subject metadata scheme. And some options that I have included here are links into the Library of Congress subject headings. The Getty, as I said, has a number of very powerful controlled vocabularies. And there's also GeoNames, which is a controlled vocabulary for geographic names. In the Getty also they have some excellent controlled vocabulary for time periods and so forth. So I would avail myself of those resources if you have the opportunity. But there's also a pretty good likelihood that you are going to need to develop some of your own subject terms that will make sense and be appropriate for your particular project. The guideline there is be consistent. Keep up with them and be consistent. And the tag fields in Tropy make that quite easy, actually. For language, you can use multiple languages, you can spell out the languages, or you can use an abbreviation, but be consistent. So if you are saying ENG for English, do that every single time. Format. This is usually of the digital object if you need to track a file type. And you can include things like the number of pixels if that's relevant to you. The contributor is an individual, an organization, or service who is not the person who is the main person responsible for the content, but it's somebody who has some responsibility in the creation of the content. The description is a field that can be more fulsome, and it often includes like table of contents, abstracts, more narrative descriptions of the resource. I will say that when you are putting things into Tropy itself, be a little wary when you're copying directly off of a web page, which is a very useful thing to do, but you want to be sure that you don't pick up inadvertently coding tags like HTML tags. The publisher is the person or entity responsible for making the resource available. If it is also the creator, then don't duplicate that. Just leave it blank. It's not necessary. The coverage includes that spatial location, temporal period, jurisdiction. Like I said, the Getty has some great vocabularies, and then geonames again. Relation. This is a reference to a related work. For example, you've got a poem. The poem is part of a larger collection and is associated with an audio recording of the poet reading that work. These can all be linked together using this field. So now I am showing you what Tropy actually looks like. And as I mentioned, if you are familiar with Zotero, I think that it looks kind of similar here. You can see that in the kind of center, there's the image. Below it, this is where you can put some meaningful notes. You can be actually, this is a very large field. You can put as much in here as you want. I just created a little bit to give you a sense. All that becomes searchable. And then the big power on that left-hand side where it says metadata. And you can see that I have selected Dublin Core. And I have given this artifact. This is an artifact out of the museum at Eleusis, and I've given it the title of Kernos, which is a particular type of ritual vessel. You can see here that it has a type. Oh, the creator is me because I took the picture. If you actually knew the creator, the potter of that, you would put that there. The Kernoi. That is a specific type of vessel. That's the plural of Kernos, and it is in one of those Getty vocabularies. And the source, this is from the Archaeological Museum at Eleusis. You can see the rights here. There are no rights restrictions on this, which means I, as the person taking the picture, have the rights to use that picture. So I put my own name there so I could keep track of that. And then there's a whole bunch of subjects. And you can see the Elefsina, that's out of geonames, so I'm using some of this controlled vocabulary. Also the coverage. I have here the coverage is again using from the Getty controlled vocabulary, and I have included some of the Greek. I can put Greek in there as well. Tags are another way of adding keywords. And one of the things that is really handy is that you can add a color to them, which is useful if you're trying to group them into subcollections. So the way that works is that on the tag list, you can right click and change the color, and that makes it really easy to just spot things. And then lists, items can appear in multiple lists. So lists are very valuable for tying chapters or subparts as you're organizing your work. And adding to a list is simply drag and drop. And to show you here, if you go up to File, New, you can see Project Item List or Tag, but that's how you create a list. So related images. Sometimes you want to link images as part of a greater whole. And as I mentioned earlier in this presentation, they can be pages of the same document. They can be different images of the same thing. These are the times you would want to use this is when you have pictures that have the same metadata, but they can have different notes. And it's really easy to do. It's just drag and drop. You just drag them under each other. You can also annotate text documents, and this is very, very useful for archival research. Also within a photograph, you can just highlight a subsection and it pulls it out, and then you can take notes on or annotate just that segment. So those of you who are doing deep archival research, you can have your many pages of a document collapsed into a single file, and then you can annotate each page as much as you want. And here's how that works. What I did here is I took just a picture of a document that I made. This is actually the document that is explaining metadata and Dublin Core for lay people. And if you see up at the top, there's that little tool that looks like a little box, like it's a snipping tool. You highlight the subsection that you want to annotate, and what it does is pulls it out into a new document, but puts it into a sub-document. And over on the left-hand side in the bottom, you can see how they are linked. And from there, you can type in all of your notes and do your annotation. So searching happens within the project. You cannot search across the projects, which goes back into that earlier slide when I'm saying think carefully about how you want to structure your projects. I want to be able to search across all of my ancient Greek archaeological photographs. So I'm going to have a very, very, very large project, even though it's really more of a lifelong research agenda than it is thinking of a particular article, a particular book. It searches the metadata. It can also search the tags and the notes. So here we are, just showing you some of my Eleusinian Mysteries pictures. And you can see here a number of things I want to point out. You've got all those tags, and that's the specific subjects, some of which are controlled vocabulary and some of which are very specific to my project, such as the Agalastos Petra, which is the stone of sorrow. It's an important ritual stone in the Eleusinian Mysteries. That is not going to end up, it's too specific to end up in a controlled vocabulary, but it's very important for my project. So to demonstrate how the searching works, as I mentioned, cave temples are a really important thing in ancient Greek religion. So if I have used cave temples in the tags in the metadata, and so when I go to search on caves, it's pulling up both the Agalastos Petra and the Platonian cave in this instance. And if it was pulling from my really big thing, then I have just tons of cave temples. And here we have an entry for the Platonian cave, which is, as I said, a very important cave temple and in the Eleusinian Mysteries. And what I wanted to show you here is you see how there are two photographs. If you go over to the left-hand side, down a bit, what's happened is that I have put these two together into a single document. One of them is further away, which is what you're looking at, but one of them is a close-up. So it has the same metadata. This would be the same kind of thing if I was doing a document with multiple pages. But I wanted to show you that this can be done for pictures that are related in this way that are not necessarily, a single document. They can have different notes associated with them, which is quite valuable. Exporting. You can export to JSON LD, and this is a limited linked data function that will export metadata and notes, but it's not going to export the photo itself. But this way it can be added to web pages, which would also include things like WordPress. And this helps with your search engine optimization. And then you can export directly into Omeka S, which is provided also by the Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and New Media. To export, you just right-click on the items. So you highlight them, right-click, and you have the export selected items, and you can choose JSON LD. For exporting into Omeka S, you will need the Omeka S plugin, and the instructions are here. I've given you the link, and so you can go forward and find that. If you wanted to use Omeka S as an American University member of our community, then you would need to contact the library and we will set you up with an account. So thank you so much for joining us. If you have any further questions, please feel free to contact me. My email is Greece, like the country, @american.edu. Thank you.